Jaylen Rhodes sat frozen in the lecture hall, while his Ivy League professor laughed at him in front of 200 students. Maybe calculus is too advanced for some scholarships, the professor smirked, as students snickered. Jaylen said nothing. Didn't flinch. But hours later, after the room emptied, he walked back to the board. And what he wrote changed everything. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The scent of old wood and fresh coffee lingered in the air of Hawthorne Hall, mingling with the faint echo of classical piano playing somewhere down the corridor. It was only the second week of the semester, but the lecture hall was already at full capacity, brimming with anxious energy and the low hum of whispers. Every student had heard the stories about Professor Victor Mallory, his mind, his cruelty, and his infamous problem set. Today he stood at the front of the hall like a conductor before a silent orchestra. On the board behind him, a dense, sprawling equation spread across 4 chalk panels. It looked more like a piece of abstract art than a solvable problem. Partial derivatives, nested integrals, variables that snaked through 3 dimensions, the sort of equation designed not to be solved, but to see who would try. Professor Mallory turned slowly toward the room, dusting his hands off with the flair of a showman. His suit was crisp, his silver hair perfectly combed, and his eyes scanned the students like a hawk watching for a wounded mouse. "Now," he said, voice smooth and sharp, "who here believes themselves capable of solving what Isaac Newton once described as the heart of mathematical beauty?" A few hands hesitantly went up. Students looked around, unsure whether volunteering would be seen as bold or foolish. Mallory ignored them. Instead, his gaze drifted toward the back of the room. Row J, seat 3. Seated alone, and half-shadowed beneath the tall arched window was Jaylen Rhodes, 18, freshman, full academic scholarship, from Crenshaw High, South Central LA. GPA 4.0, SAT, 1580. A rising star from a place the university only remembered existed when brochures demanded diversity photos. Professor Mallory's smile turned blade thin. "Mr. Rhodes," he said slowly, drawing out each syllable like he was unfamiliar with the name. "Perhaps our newest Ivy League experiment would care to take a crack at it." Jaylen looked up. He was dressed in a navy hoodie, black jeans, and worn-out sneakers. No designer brands. No flashy laptop. Just a spiral notebook and a cheap pen he kept clicking in his left hand. His brown skin and quiet presence had already made him the subject of more glances than conversations. Most students didn't know much about him. Just that he didn't talk, didn't participate, didn't smile much. And now, every eye in the room was on him. Jaylen blinked once. Looked at the board, then back at Mallory. He didn't speak, didn't move. Silence stretched. Mallory let the moment sit long enough to curdle. "No thoughts at all?" the professor pressed, voice thick with mock surprise. "Or have we found calculus too different from whatever it is they teach in your high school?" A few snickers flickered through the hall. Someone near the front muttered under their breath, "He doesn't belong here." It wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. In the acoustics of that old hall, whispers carried like shouts. Jaylen heard it. So did the professor. So did the rest of the class. Still, he said nothing. Mallory gave a small, dismissive wave, and turned back to the board. "Very well. Let's find someone a bit more prepared." A white girl with highlighted curls was called on. She stood and approached the board nervously. The spotlight shifted. The tension diffused, but not for Jaylen. He sat motionless, pen still clicking slowly. His face didn't twitch, but his hand tightened around the spiral notebook, until his knuckles blanched. Every cell in his body was vibrating. Not with rage, not with embarrassment, with something deeper. A sense of being cracked open under a microscope, misread, misjudged, and then discarded. But he held it all in. Years of holding it in had made him very good at that. The rest of the lecture passed in a blur of chalk dust and formulae. Mallory spoke. Students nodded. A few asked questions, but Jaylen remained a statue. Watching, calculating, storing. When class ended, the herd began to move. Laptops slamming shut, backpacks hoisted, conversations reigniting. Jaylen didn't move. A couple of students brushed past him with low chuckles. One bumped his shoulder hard enough to jolt his notebook off the desk. No apology. As Jaylen bent to pick it up, someone behind him said, "Just loud enough. Even a calculator would have done better than that." Still, he said nothing. Mallory gathered his materials with theatrical calm, closing his leather-bound notebook and straightening his tie. As he passed Jaylen's row, he offered a brief glance, cold and full of finality, the kind of look that said, "I already know your story ends in failure." Jaylen waited 30 seconds, then a minute. Until the hall was empty, the last echo of footfalls faded into silence. Only then did he rise. The board was still covered in the problem. No one had erased it. The girl Mallory called on hadn't solved it either. Her attempt had ended midway, wrong direction, bad assumption. Jaylen walked to the front. The chalk sat in the tray like a dare. He stared at the equation, let his eyes roam over it from end to beginning. To him, math wasn't symbols and rules. It was motion, language, an unspoken rhythm that spoke when words failed. He didn't start where the girl did. He started 3 layers deep, at the root of the substitution hidden inside the second integral. And from there he worked backwards. One line, then another. Each step methodical, elegant, exact. No scribbles, no hesitations. After 5 minutes, 10 lines danced beneath the original problem like poetry. He wasn't solving it, he was sculpting it, carving it out of the wall like it had always been there, waiting to be revealed. When he finished, Jaylen stepped back, looked once, nodded slightly, then dropped the chalk. He grabbed his bag and turned to leave. He never saw the figure standing in the shadows just outside the hallway door. Dr. Victor Mallory had returned for his notebook, forgotten on the ledge near the podium, and walked in just in time to witness the final line Jaylen had drawn. Mallory froze. He stared at the board, at the revised path Jaylen had carved. His mouth parted slightly, but no words came, because what Jaylen had done wasn't just correct, it was impossible. Not only had he solved the unsolvable problem, he had done it through an alternate route that even Mallory hadn't considered. A route that was cleaner, simpler, and devastatingly brilliant. Mallory stepped forward, eyes locked on the final line. The chalk still rolled slightly on the tray, evidence of how recent it was. He picked it up, touched the equation, recalculated it in his head. Once, then again, then once more. Each time, the result held. He whispered to himself, low and shaken, That can't be right." But it was. And Jaylen was already halfway down the corridor, unaware of the silent war that had just ignited behind him. Mallory's pride is cracked, and Jaylen just became a threat he can no longer ignore. Jaylen walked back to his dorm in silence, head lowered beneath the hood of his navy sweatshirt. The late afternoon sun splashed across the manicured quad of Hawthorne University, casting golden halos on Gothic architecture. Students lounged on benches with overpriced coffee, earbuds in, lives untouched by the kinds of storms Jaylen had grown up weathering. He moved past them unnoticed. Just another body in the system. Not the boy who had silently corrected a tenured professor's error. He hadn't told anyone. Not Miles, not even his mom. That moment at the chalkboard belonged to him alone. For now. His room was small, shared, cinder-block walls, a twin bed and metal desk crammed into a corner. A single poster of Malcolm X hung above his bed. His side of the room was neat. His roommate's was. Jaylen dropped his bag, sat on the bed, and closed his eyes. And just like that, he was back in Crenshaw. Summer in South Central LA didn't just bring heat. It brought warning, a tension in the air. Police sirens echoing in the distance. Kids playing in the fire hydrant spray while their moms watched nervously from porches. Jaylen remembered it like it was yesterday. The click of the front door at 6 a.m., the sound of his mother slipping into her uniform, the low hum of exhaustion in her voice. "Jay," she used to say softly, kneeling beside his bed with a kiss to the forehead. "Be smarter than what's waiting outside that door." His mother, Denise Rhodes, worked 2 jobs, a day shift at the hospital, as a CNA, and a night shift at a gas station near Florence Ave. She rarely slept. Sometimes she ate dinner standing up. She never once missed a bill. Jaylen idolized her. His father, Marcus Rhodes, was different. When Jaylen was 9, Marcus was arrested during a routine traffic stop. Police claimed he had drugs in the car. They found a bag under the seat. The court assigned him a public defender who didn't even ask for the body cam footage. Marcus pled guilty to avoid the 20-year sentence they threatened. Jaylen never forgot the day his dad left. The knock at the door. The shouting. His mother screaming, "That's not his." And the image of his father being shoved into a squad car, his hands cuffed and his face calm. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he knew how the story always ended. From that day, Jaylen learned two things. First, that silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. And second, that brilliance wasn't enough. You had to outthink the system designed to bury you. At Crenshaw High, Jaylen was invisible to most teachers, until he started doing things they couldn't explain. Solving pre-calc problems 2 units ahead of the class, sketching out 3D graphs in pen on the backs of old pizza boxes. His algebra teacher, Mr. Davenport, noticed. One day, he handed Jaylen a library card. "They got books in there. No one touches," he said, voice low. "Start with the blue calculus one in the corner. No one's checked it out in years. That means it's yours now." Jaylen lived in that library. From 7th grade to senior year, he taught himself everything: limits, derivatives, the chain rule, series convergence. He'd watch MIT OpenCourseWare lectures at night, pausing the video every few seconds to scribble down what he didn't understand. He asked no one for help. He trusted no one to give it. By senior year, he could solve college-level problems in his head, but it didn't matter until a woman named Dr. Bailey came to his school. She ran a program, STEM Ascent, aimed at diversifying elite universities. A pipeline for underrepresented talent in science and engineering. She reviewed his scores, his self-taught transcript, his notebooks filled with scratch math in 3 colors of ink. She didn't even blink. "You're not just good," she said. "You're rare." With her help, Jaylen applied to 8 universities. 4 rejected him outright. 3 waitlisted him. Hawthorne accepted him with conditions. He was placed into a transition cohort, a euphemism for remedial orientation. The university didn't trust inner-city kids to survive on their own. Jaylen was told it would ease the adjustment. But it wasn't an adjustment. It was a message. "We're watching you. Prove you deserve this." Back in his dorm, Jaylen sat at his desk and opened a worn notebook. The cover was cracked. Inside were pages of raw calculations. From middle school to now. No grades. No teacher's red pen. Just progress. He flipped to the last page and wrote down the solution he had scribbled on the lecture board earlier. A complete derivation. Elegant. Exact. Then he stared at the page. A question dug into his gut like a nail. Why did I stay silent? The answer echoed back. Because I wanted them to wonder. But even that couldn't shake the weight pressing down on his chest. He stood up, stretched, and crossed the room to the mini-fridge. Grabbed a bottle of water. On his way back to the desk, he noticed something slipped under his door. A folded piece of paper. Jaylen picked it up cautiously. No name. No signature. Just 6 printed words. In bold black font. "Stay in your lane. Rhodes." He froze. A slow breath. Then another. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't even creative. It was a threat wrapped in racism. A reminder that his presence on campus was not only noticed, it was resented. Jaylen didn't panic. Didn't flinch. He walked over to his desk, unfolded the note again, and laid it flat next to his calculus solution. Then, without a word, he began to memorize both. Because he knew the war wasn't in the books. It was in the silence. Jaylen folds the note, slips it into his calculus notebook, and decides he won't just prove he belongs. He'll make them choke on their doubts. Jaylen stood at the edge of the student housing office lobby, holding the folded note in his hand like it was something radioactive. The receptionist barely glanced at him before turning back to her screen. "I'm here to report something," he said, keeping his voice steady. She looked up. "Is it a maintenance issue?" "No," he replied, and unfolded the paper. "Someone slipped this under my door." Her eyes scanned the bold block letters. "Stay in your lane." She blinked. "Do you know who left it?" He shook his head. "No. That's why I'm here." The woman took the paper, stared at it for half a beat, then set it down like it was junk mail. "Look, Jaylen," she said, softening her tone the way people do when they're about to be dismissive. "I'm sorry you received that. It's probably just a dumb prank. People do that kind of thing all the time, especially during orientation week. It's harmless." Harmless. Jaylen didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes tightened. "Can I at least file a report?" he asked. "We can document it," she said vaguely. "But without proof, there's not much we can do. And honestly, if you start making waves this early in the semester," her voice trailed off. Jaylen caught the subtext. "Don't cause trouble. Don't make it about race." He walked out of the office with the note in his pocket and something colder than anger in his chest. That afternoon, the air in Hawthorne's lecture hall felt thicker than usual. Jaylen walked in a minute early and went to his usual seat in the back. He noticed the glances. They weren't subtle. People knew, not about the note, but about the rumor. Somehow the story had spread. Jaylen had solved one of Mallory's unbreakable equations. And even though the board had been wiped clean by the next morning, a few students who stayed late had whispered about what they saw. Rumors turned to online threads. Threads turned into speculation. Some praised him, most mocked him. The nickname started as a joke on a private Discord server, the Mute Genius. Within days, it evolved. The Quota Genius. Then finally, what stuck? The scholarship ghost. Jaylen didn't respond to any of it. He didn't post. He didn't comment. He didn't engage. But every morning, he saw his name pop up in whispers on Yik and Reddit. White students dissected his silence like it was strategy. Others claimed it was arrogance. A few said what others wouldn't.
Of course he's quiet.
He doesn't belong here. Dr. Mallory entered the room precisely at 2 a.m. Let's have a little fun today, he announced, turning to the board. Let's see what separates the tourists from the residents in this discipline. He scribbled out a problem so convoluted it took 3 panels. When he finished, he turned back and scanned the room. Mr. Rhodes, he said, eyes gleaming. Today might be your day to show us you earned that seat. A beat of silence. Jaylen looked at him. No emotion. No response. Mallory chuckled, then turned to the class. Anyone else? Or are we all too shy today? A white student from the front row. Kevin, tall, confident, the son of a physicist, rose and solved the first half. Mallory nodded. Not bad, but can anyone finish it? No one moved. Mallory turned again to Jaylen. Still nothing? Jaylen stared back, stone-faced. Fascinating, Mallory said, voice smooth, like syrup. It's always interesting to me how some students mistake presence for participation. Silence isn't a skill, Mr. Rhodes. It's a vacancy. The room laughed nervously, but they laughed. Jaylen stared at the board. He had already solved it. In his head, backwards and forwards, twice. But he said nothing, because he knew what this was. A performance, and Mallory needed an audience more than he needed an answer. Later that night, Jaylen sat on the steps outside the science building. Hoodie up, watching students walk past in groups, laughter trailing behind them. The campus lights flickered across the stone walkways, casting shadows like ghosts. He opened Reddit. Another post. Scholarship kids still can't answer basic calculus LMAO. 70 upvotes. He closed it. The worst part wasn't the racism. It was the way it always disguised itself as jokes, as questions, as curiosity. It came in phrases like, don't take it personally. It's not about race. He's just quiet. But it was always about race. All because white students were allowed to be quiet, to fail, to stumble, to grow. Jaylen wasn't. He was a symbol before he ever opened his mouth. One afternoon, after yet another lecture where Mallory skipped over Jaylen during the Q&A, Jaylen went to the library. He sat at his usual table near the engineering journals and opened his laptop. He wasn't there to study. He was watching old footage of black mathematicians, people who looked like him, men and women, whose names were footnotes in white-written textbooks, but legends in their own right. David Blackwell, Katherine Johnson, Albert Frank Cox. He watched an interview clip of Johnson. When you're the only one in the room, she said, they'll either ignore you or make you prove you belong every single day. Either way, you better be ready. Jaylen closed the laptop. He was tired of being ignored. The next day, Mallory began class the same way he always did, with a problem designed to intimidate. He was halfway through the second panel when Jaylen looked up. And then something shifted. Jaylen raised his hand. It was subtle, quiet, but like a trigger had been pulled. The entire room turned toward him. Even Mallory froze. The chalk in his hand paused midair. Jaylen's hand was steady, confident. No one moved. No one whispered. No one laughed. The silence was absolute. It wasn't just that he raised his hand. It was that, for the first time, every student in that room had to reckon with the fact that maybe, just maybe, they were wrong about him. And maybe Mallory was too. Mallory's chalk drops to the floor as he stares at Jaylen, caught between challenge and fear. Jaylen's hand stayed in the air for a full 10 seconds before Mallory finally spoke. Mr. Rhodes, the professor said carefully, his voice lacking its usual theatrical charm. Do you have a question? Jaylen didn't lower his hand. No, he said calmly. I have a solution. A hush fell across the lecture hall. Even Kevin, the golden boy in the front row, shifted in his seat. The usual smirks were gone. Phones quietly tilted out of sight. For once no one wanted to be caught looking distracted. Mallory blinked. He didn't like surprises. Then, by all means, he said, stepping aside. Educate us. Jaylen stood without urgency, picked up his worn notebook, and walked to the board. It wasn't just confidence. It was precision. He didn't look at anyone. Didn't clear his throat. Just picked up the chalk and began. The problem Mallory had written was a carefully crafted mathematical labyrinth, 3 pages of nested integrals, a curveball change of variables, a hidden asymptote trap. It was designed not to be solved, at least, not quickly. But Jaylen moved like he was transcribing from memory. One line. Clean, then another. No stalling, no hesitation. Within a minute, whispers began. By the second minute, students were leaning forward, squinting. By the third, even Mallory had stopped pretending he wasn't watching closely. By minute 4, Jaylen was closing in on the solution. And by minute 5, he stepped back, placed the chalk gently on the tray, and said simply, "It converges at the limit of -1 over root 2. If you plug that back into the series, you get bounded growth within 3 decimal points of the original function." Silence. Then Mallory laughed once, too loud. "Well, that's thorough." He didn't move toward the board, didn't check the work. Instead, he turned to the class. It's always fascinating how fresh minds can stumble into unconventional paths. Mr. Rhodes may have skipped some expected steps, but creativity counts in mathematics too. The students looked confused. Some nodded. Others squinted. Jaylen didn't blink. He knew exactly what Mallory was doing. Downplay. Dismiss. Discredit. But the board didn't lie, and neither did the stunned expression Mallory wore when he first realized Jaylen was right. Jaylen went back to his seat, calmly, quietly. But inside him, something settled into place. Not pride, not revenge, just certainty. 2 hours later, Mallory sat alone in his office, door locked, blinds closed. He scrolled through his university portal, opening faculty-grade access to student records. He typed, Jaylen M. Rhodes. The file popped up, high school, Crenshaw High, Los Angeles, GPA, 4.0.0, ASAT EA, 1580, AP Calculus BC score 5. Recommendation letters, 1 from a math teacher, 2 from STEM nonprofit mentors. Mallory clicked through them. 2 glowing, 2 perfect, 2 polished. He leaned back in his chair. Notebooks, library books, YouTube lectures? Really? He didn't buy it. In his world, no one solved that equation in 5 minutes without extensive coaching or some form of support. He clicked again, opening Jaylen's admissions file. Under program type, it read, Diversity Initiative, STEM Ascent. Mallory smirked. There it was, quota. He pulled up Jaylen's performance in the transition cohort, mostly as a few notes on exemplary comprehension. A final entry caught his attention. Mentor assigned, Dr. Lena Park. Mallory stared at that name for a long moment, then smiled to himself. He had history with Park. She was sharp, ambitious, and a known critic of his methods. She'd once called his curriculum intellectually exclusionary. And now she was mentoring Rhodes? Of course. Mallory closed the laptop gently and leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers together. This, he whispered, might be fun after all. 2 days later, in a small apartment back in South Central LA, Denise Rhodes stood at her kitchen counter, sorting bills. Her feet ached from a 12-hour shift. Her hands trembled slightly. Not from fear, but fatigue. The mail had come late that day. She sifted through the envelopes absent-mindedly until one caught her eye. It bore the Hawthorne University seal. She smiled instinctively. Jaylen always told her not to worry about school stuff, that he had it under control. She opened the envelope. As she read the first line, her smile faded, then collapsed entirely. Her hands gripped the counter. The letter dropped to the floor. Subject: Notice of Scholarship Status Review. Reason: Possible academic integrity violation. Date: Immediate investigation initiated. She read it again, and again. Her knees weakened. The scholarship was the reason her son could be there. It was the lifeline. The symbol that after everything, after Marcus, after working 2 jobs, after begging the district for better textbooks, Jaylen had beaten the odds. And now it was slipping away. Without warning, without explanation. She reached for her phone, hands shaking, and dialed. It rang. and rang. Then Jaylen's voice came through, calm and clear. Hey, it's Jaylen. I'm probably at the library. Leave it. Beep? She said nothing for a second, then whispered, Jay baby, they're trying to take it from you. Please call me back. She hung up and stared at the letter on the floor. Not in fear, but in fury. Meanwhile, back at Hawthorne, Jaylen checks his university email and sees the same letter blinking in bold at the top of his inbox. Jaylen stared at his laptop screen, the subject line of the email glowing like a threat. Academic Integrity Board hearing notification. Urgent. No explanation. No attachments. Just a room number, a date, and a time. He didn't need more. He already knew. He leaned back slowly in his chair, eyes still locked on the screen. His dorm room buzzed faintly with life, music in the hallway, the hum of a vending machine down the corridor. But in that moment, everything else dropped into silence. They were coming for him. Not because he broke a rule, but because he had broken their expectations. The hearing room felt more like a courtroom than a university office. Long table, cold walls, a single chair across from a panel of 4 faculty members. Jaylen walked in alone. No advisor, no mentor, just a notebook in his hand and a storm behind his eyes. Across from him sat Dean Harlow, Professor Godfrey, a compliance officer, and of course Dr. Victor Mallory. Mallory looked more amused than concerned, his fingers steepled in front of him like he was waiting to be impressed.
Mr. Rhodes, Harlow began, her voice dry and bureaucratic. You've been called here for a preliminary hearing regarding potential violations of the university's academic integrity policy.
Jaylen said nothing. This is not a disciplinary ruling, she added, but a fact-finding review. You'll have the opportunity to respond to the evidence presented. Dr. Mallory cleared his throat like he was warming up for a monologue. No one doubts Mr. Rhodes' performance, he said, flipping open a manila folder. In fact, that's the very issue. His recent exam responses were not just accurate. They were too accurate. He held up a printed exam. Take a look at this, he said. Full credit. No errors. No erasures. Every step. Perfectly efficient. Every route. The shortest possible path to the solution. It's as if he knew the answers before the question was even asked. Mallory looked at the others, letting his words hang. In my professional opinion, he continued, these results are consistent with algorithmically generated solutions, specifically advanced AI language models trained in symbolic computation. One of the deans raised an eyebrow. You believe he used AI to cheat? I believe, Mallory said slowly, that it is statistically improbable for a student with no prior formal training in calculus to consistently outperform doctoral candidates without assistance. Jaylen's fists curled under the table. There it was. Not a question. A quiet accusation, wearing the mask of logic. He didn't rush to respond. When he did, his voice was low and even.
I didn't cheat.
Mallory tilted his head. Then perhaps you can help us understand how you achieved these results. Jaylen looked down for a moment. Not in shame, in composure. Then he spoke. I taught myself calculus from library books, from YouTube videos, from forums, from mistakes, from spending summers inside while other kids were outside, from rewatching the same MIT lecture 20 times because I didn't understand the first 19. The room stayed still. My mother worked 2 jobs. We didn't have tutors. We didn't have money for prep courses. I learned on scraps, on whatever I could find. I solved problems on the back of food stamps and bus transfers because I didn't always have notebooks. He took a breath, controlled but full. You don't believe me because you don't think someone like me can exist. Because in your head, black boys from South Central don't solve problems you can't. So when I do, the only explanation is I must have cheated. Harlow's expression faltered for the first time. Jaylen continued. I've been solving problems since I was 9. Not just in math. In life, I watched my father get locked up for something he didn't do. I watched my mother carry the weight of 2 lives. And I learned that silence isn't weakness. It's survival. He reached into his bag and pulled out a worn spiral notebook. This is every problem I've worked since I was 14. He handed it to the board. They passed it around, pages filled with raw equations, trial and error, notes scribbled in the margins, multiple attempts at the same concept. Some problems crossed out, others reworked in pen. Proof. Not of perfection but of process, real learning, human effort. When the notebook returned to Jaylen, no one spoke for a moment. Dean Harlow cleared her throat. Mr. Rhodes, We don't have enough evidence to recommend expulsion. Relief didn't wash over Jaylen. Only tension, held tighter. However, she added, given the concerns raised and the scrutiny surrounding your case, we are placing you on academic probation until the end of the semester. You'll be monitored. Your exams will be proctored under supervision. Jaylen nodded once,
then stood
and walked out.
The sun was setting by the time Jaylen returned to his dorm. The halls were mostly quiet. His roommate was out again, probably still pretending Jaylen didn't exist. He sat at his desk, staring blankly at the books that once brought him joy. They didn't anymore. Everything felt tainted. He wasn't just on probation. He was marked, and Mallory had made sure of it. Jaylen leaned back and looked up at the ceiling light. Then froze. A faint glint caught his eye. Tiny, metallic, not part of the bulb. He stood, climbed on his bed, and unscrewed the light fixture. Inside, tucked between plastic and wire, was a small black object. A lens, a hidden camera, pointed directly at his desk. His bed, his life, his breath caught. But not in fear. In fury. This wasn't just suspicion. This was surveillance. This was violation. Jaylen stepped down, holding the light cover in one hand, the tiny camera in the other. He stared at it, then walked across the room, opened the drawer where he kept his backup phone, an old Android from high school, and dialed. One ring.
two.
Then, yo, Miles, Jaylen said.
The voice on the other end lit up. Jay? Damn, you still breathing? What's good?
I need your help, Jaylen said. I think someone's been watching me. Pause. You mean, like, online? No. In my room. A beat. I found a camera in my ceiling. Silence. Then Miles said exactly what Jaylen expected him to. Say less. I'm on the next bus. Miles hangs up, and Jaylen stares out the dorm window, knowing this is no longer about proving his innocence. It's about exposing the system watching him fail. Jaylen didn't sleep much that night. The camera in his dorm ceiling replayed in his mind. Invisible eyes watching his solitude, his work, his struggles. He paced across his room, notebook open, phone in hand, trying to catch every detail he might have missed. Finally, he sank onto his bed and called Miles, his childhood friend, the one person he trusted without question. Miles picked up on the third ring. You okay? Can't sleep, Jaylen said. I found a camera in my ceiling. Miles was silent for a moment. Then, that's not okay. I'll meet you at the library in an hour. Jaylen hung up, heart pounding. This was no longer academic. It was personal. He hadn't planned retaliation. He had only planned to survive. But the rules were changing. They met at the old public library down a block from Jaylen's dorm, a brick building with high windows, smelling of paper and old floors. Miles arrived with a laptop, his mess of curly hair tied back, eyes bright with a kind of fierce determination. He dropped out last year after scholarship fallout, but kept hustling freelance tech jobs, hackathons, coding gigs. Jaylen trusted him because Miles saw things, digital connections others ignored. Jaylen placed the little camera plastic cover removed on the table. Miles flipped it over. You sure it's legit? Miles asked, lifting the circuit board, lens still visible. Jaylen nodded. I saw it, pulled it. Didn't touch anything else. Miles plugged his own external drive into Jaylen's laptop and began inspecting metadata, timestamp files, dorm recordings, campus wiring maps. Jaylen watched him, every flicker in his face, a hope or fear. Miles's fingers moved fast, precise. Over the next few days, they built a small network of evidence. Jaylen forwarded emails of overheard student whispers, screenshots of the Reddit threads, photos of the camera lens. Miles pulled logs from campus Wi-Fi where he could. He accessed with Jaylen's silent permission CCTV near dorm halls, academic buildings. What they discovered was worse than Jaylen had expected. University staff, not just Dr. Mallory, were monitoring certain diversity admits, a list unofficial but real. Names of students admitted under diversity-assisted programs. These students were being quietly tracked, their grades flagged, their dorms subject to extra inspections, their social media watched, their exam submissions collected for comparison, files hidden in folders labeled cohort performance, probation potential, risk profiles. Jaylen's chest tightened. He saw his own name appear again and again. The camera in his room was no mistake. It was a tool of control, a puzzle piece in a system built to watch him and his peers fail. or at least to be always proving why. Miles flagged something even darker, a private group chat among several professors, some older, some assistant level, text threads mocking urban admissions. How many of these kids even test well? Hand-holding the diversity and worse. Screenshots showed Mallory using dismissive language about students from Crenshaw, Compton, places he viewed as lowering standards. One thread had a professor complaining, "Always white knocking on doors for merit. These urban admits get in before someone better." Another, "They stay silent. That silence is their weapon. Let's see how long it lasts without help." Jaylen felt a sour pulse in his stomach reading that last one. That sounded like more than disdain. More like a wager. Jaylen and Miles spent late nights assembling what they had. Jaylen's exams, the camera metadata, screenshots, chat logs. Miles edited small video clips, recorded voiceover with Jaylen's voice describing each breach. They stored everything in encrypted files. Jaylen made backups. Copies went to his external hard drive. Another to Miles's cloud-locked folder. They whispered in study lounges, avoided speaking loudly, erased browsing histories. Because they didn't just distrust Professor Mallory anymore. They feared him, and those behind him. But Jaylen felt a new pulse in himself. Courage. If the system was rigged, then it needed light. One afternoon, Jaylen confronted Mallory after class. He stayed behind, stood at the board, chalk in hand, backpack slung, voice quiet but steady. "Professor Mallory," he said. The ears in the room prickled. The ones who had whispered. Eunice Leary, first row. Rahul Patel, fourth. They watched. "Yes, Mr. Rhodes," Mallory said, tone neutral, as though he expected nothing. "I want transparency. I want to know who decided my dorm was a special case, who has been watching me, and under whose orders." Jaylen flipped his notebook open, showing exam scores and timestamps. "I want these surveillance logs shared. I want the chat logs you don't want your name in." Mallory's eyes flickered. A small corner of his mouth twisted. "You want proof of a proof yet unseen." He paused. He wrote something on the board, erased it with brisk motion. "You're asking a lot from someone who hasn't been proven guilty of anything." Jaylen nodded. "I don't need your admission. I need accountability." Mallory nodded slowly, as though considering a chess move. "Very well. I'll look into your questioning under advisement. But Dr. Rhodes, be careful. Sometimes pursuing a truth demands more than one is ready to pay." That night Jaylen couldn't sleep again. He lay in bed, eyes fixed on the ceiling. The absence of the camera hole felt like a warning. Someone had removed it. Maybe they saw it. Maybe it was moved. Maybe destroyed. But the fear remained. Watching doesn't require eyes always visible. Miles dropped by quietly. They sat together at Jaylen's desk, spread out laptops, notes, chat logs. They listened back to audio from study hall sessions, from professors' lectures. Miles' isolated voices. One recording from last week. Mallory, off mic, talking to two colleagues. The audio was grainy, but his voice was clear enough. "Let's see how long he lasts without help." Jaylen's heart jolted. The phrase had shown in the chat logs. Now it was Mallory's own voice, confirming what they'd suspected. He viewed Jaylen not as student, but experiment, as something to test, something to prove wrong. Jaylen pressed pause. He looked at Miles. Miles looked back, face a mask of anger and fear. "This is it," Jaylen said. "This is what I needed." Miles nodded. "We've got enough to escalate now. Not just to the dean, to the news, to people who can't ignore this." Jaylen swallowed, thinking of his mom, working 2 shifts back in South Central, believing in her son, thinking of nights solving calculus in the dark, listening to traffic roar outside, learning silence as survival. "This is more than math," Jaylen said. "This is about every student they monitor, about every voice they silence, and every promise they break." The next morning, Jaylen walked to class carrying a manila envelope. It held copies of screenshots, audio, logs, backup hard drive. The weight of it felt like truth in his backpack. He passed through corridors filled with khaki pants and blue polos, with students who said nothing, who looked away. He passed Mallory's door, whose nameplate gleamed under fluorescent lights. Prof. Victor Mallory, Ph. Mallory was standing in the hallway that early, hands behind his back, eyes fixed on his phone. He looked up when Jaylen walked by. Their eyes met. Mallory didn't nod. No smile. But there was something there. Watchfulness. Perhaps recognition. Perhaps calculation. Jaylen kept walking. That evening, as Jaylen returned to his dorm, his phone buzzed. It was his mother. She'd received an anonymous envelope at home. Inside, a typed note. No signature. Be careful what you expose. Some cameras watch your light too. Denise Rhodes closed the door behind her, hands trembling. Jaylen read the message over the phone. His stomach dropped. Mothers always know what's at stake. The stakes were no longer just academic. They were personal. Back in his room, Jaylen sat alone in darkness. The lamp beside his desk flickered. He stared at the spot on the wall where the camera had been, staring at the ceiling, listening, waiting. He opened his laptop. He inserted the audio clip. He listened to Mallory's voice again, saying exactly what they needed. Let's see how long he lasts without help. Jaylen's jaw clenched. He realized this was no longer about surviving. It was about exposing. About making sure the truth couldn't be ignored. Unbeknownst to Jaylen, someone in administration has just discovered the email with the tape, and they are silencing the questioner before his story goes public. It was a Thursday morning, gray skies outside, the kind of day where the air felt heavy even indoors. Jaylen entered Mallory's lecture hall to find a single sheet of paper already resting on each desk. No laptops allowed today, no calculators, just scratch paper, pencils, and tension. Mallory stood at the front, arms folded like he'd been waiting for this moment all week. Surprise quiz, he said, almost casually. One problem, one page, one solution. Jaylen took his seat near the back. He glanced at the problem and immediately noticed something was off. It wasn't the complexity, it was the construction. The equation was sprawling, nonlinear, and deceptively simple in appearance. But when he began to work through it, the usual methods, separation of variables, substitution, even Laplace transforms, led nowhere. He paused, then scanned the room. Other students were already writing, heads down, scribbling wildly. But Jaylen could see it. They were going in circles, trying things that would get them half an answer or none at all. He looked back at the problem. The form was familiar, too familiar. It felt engineered, tailored, like it was designed with him in mind. Mallory walked between the aisles, slow and quiet, like a predator on patrol. When he passed Jaylen's desk, he didn't stop, didn't speak. But he paused just long enough for their eyes to meet. A challenge. Jaylen stared down at the paper again. His pencil hadn't moved. Whispers started a few rows ahead. Dude's frozen again. He's supposed to be the genius? Mallory returned to the front, glanced at the clock. 5 minutes remaining. Jaylen didn't answer the problem. He turned the sheet over, wrote a single sentence in clean, neat print. Unable to verify convergence using standard methods. Requires deeper structure. He placed his pencil down and waited. That night, he didn't go to the dining hall. He didn't check Reddit. He didn't answer texts, not even from Miles. He locked the door, pulled down the blinds, and opened his old notebook, the one with faded covers, corners bent, pages worn from years of use. The problem from Mallory's quiz sat in the center of the page, rewritten carefully. Jaylen studied it like it was a stranger trying to trick him into forgetting what he knew. He dissected it, broke it apart, rewrote it backwards. But nothing clicked. At 2 a.m., he noticed a specific expression inside the function, a substitution technique buried in an exponential term. It rang a distant bell in his mind, like a song he hadn't heard in years, but suddenly remembered the melody too. He paused, pulled out his laptop, typed in a phrase he hadn't used since high school.
Victor Mallory, preprint calculus.
A few academic repositories showed up, one link buried in a dusty digital archive. A technical paper by a then-young assistant professor named Victor E. Mallory. Title: A Proposed Framework for Unsolvable Forms Using Recursive Integration in Multivariate Spaces. Jaylen's eyes widened. He opened the document. The language was dense, overly complex, and frankly designed to intimidate. But Jaylen had spent years decoding things not meant for him. He didn't flinch. He read and reread.
For hours.
By sunrise, Jaylen sat motionless. Pages of scribbled notes and diagrams spread across his desk like forensic evidence. He had mapped the quiz problem back to Mallory's preprint structure, and it was clear now. The professor hadn't just given them a pop quiz. He'd planted a trap, a problem built using unpublished math that no student would reasonably know how to solve, unless they had read a 26-year-old academic draft buried in a non-indexed archive. It was an ambush masked as instruction. Jaylen's hands trembled slightly. Not from anger, but recognition. Because as he reworked Mallory's framework on a fresh sheet of paper, something emerged, an inconsistency. A variable limit taken under a transformation that didn't obey standard convergence rules. He paused, checked it again, then a third time. The error wasn't in Jaylen's math. It was in Mallory's. A fundamental flaw in the logic of his preprint paper. A tiny misstep, but enough to invalidate the solution in edge cases. Enough that if anyone were to apply it to real-world scenarios, the results would skew significantly. Jaylen leaned back in his chair. It wasn't just that Mallory had given him an impossible problem. It was that he had built his entire academic legacy on a mistake. The weight of the revelation settled on Jaylen's chest like a stone. This wasn't just about pride now. This was about power. Because Mallory had designed the trap, assuming Jaylen would either flail or fail. Either way, he'd reinforced the narrative that Jaylen didn't belong, that his previous success was luck, that silence meant stupidity. But Mallory hadn't expected Jaylen to recognize the blueprint, or to find the crack in the foundation. Jaylen sat in the dim glow of his desk lamp, looking at the final line of the proof he'd revised. It stood there, clean and damning. He looked at the old clock on his wall. 6:42 a.m. He hadn't slept, but his mind was clearer than it had been in weeks. He stood, went to the mirror, stared at his reflection. "You're not the one who made the mistake," he said softly to himself. He did. And this time, Jaylen had the math to prove it. Jaylen scans his corrected version of Mallory's proof, uploads it to an anonymous academic forum, and within minutes someone replies, "Who wrote this? This changes everything." Jaylen sat at his desk, eyes locked on the final line of the corrected proof. His room was scattered with notes, pages taped to the wall, post-its stuck to the window, lines of math scratched into the margins of old receipts. It looked less like a dorm room, and more like the war room of someone solving a national crisis. But this was personal. He had rewritten the foundation of Dr. Victor Mallory's most ambitious paper. Not as a challenge, not for glory, but because the mistake had to be seen. The math demanded it. He double-checked the transformation, then the limits, then the logic chain that followed. Each time the corrected version held. Not only did it make more sense, it actually worked in edge case simulations where Mallory's version broke down. Jaylen ran it against multiple scenarios using a symbolic computing engine, then coded a basic model to simulate its performance. No anomalies, no contradictions. He had fixed the mistake. He didn't know whether to feel proud or furious. He didn't get much time to decide.
I knew it, Miles said, mouth open as he stared at the screen. You just repaired a 20-year-old academic theorem. Do you realize what this is?
Jaylen leaned over the laptop as Miles scrolled through the reconstructed proof. The revised function now modeled convergence across non-linear, high-dimensional integral series with complete stability. And it used a variable limit correction, so clean, it looked like it had always belonged there. "I didn't plan this," Jaylen said. "I just couldn't let it go." "That's the thing," Miles said, standing. "He built his name on this paper, right? His whole status, his faculty title, the conferences, and you just rewrote it in your dorm room on a 2-day study binge." Jaylen rubbed the back of his neck. He buried this formula in that quiz like a trap. He thought I wouldn't see the blueprint. "But you did," Miles said, pacing. "Which means this isn't just about you passing his test. This is about you reshaping the damn floor he stands on." Jaylen sat down at his desk, exhaling slowly. "I need to put it out there," he said. "But not under my name. Not yet." Miles nodded. "Anonymously?" Jaylen hesitated, then nodded. "Let's build something no one can ignore," he said. "Something airtight." For 3 straight nights, Jaylen and Miles worked like men possessed. Miles helped him design a professional-grade presentation. Sleek, visual, with layered transitions and live simulations. They tied the fixed proof to real-world applications, optimization models, physics simulations, even climate data projections. The math wasn't just elegant, it was useful. Jaylen recorded a voiceover, modulated just enough to obscure his identity, narrating each step with calm clarity. He titled it, "A Reconsideration of Recursive Convergence in High-Dimensional Spaces." They created a pseudonym for submission, J.R. Ascent, a nod to Jaylen's initials, and the STEM Ascent program that brought him here. Then on a quiet Sunday night, they uploaded the paper to an open-access international mathematics journal that accepted anonymous submissions. Jaylen clicked submit, then leaned back and waited. 48 hours later, they received the first response. A reviewer named Dr. K. Shimizu from Tokyo Tech posted a comment under the preprint. Correction. Noted. Original function fails under XN. This version holds. Author, please contact privately. Then another. Elegant adjustment to Mallory's approach. Surprised this wasn't peer-reviewed earlier. This should be cited immediately. And another. Can someone confirm authorship? This rewrites the assumptions we've been teaching for years. Jaylen didn't respond, but he watched. As the comments piled in, by midweek the journal flagged the original Mallory paper as under review for errata. It was subtle, just a small note beneath the PDF download button. But in the world of academic publishing, it was a scarlet letter. It meant someone found something wrong, and someone big enough was paying attention to consider it. Jaylen stared at the update on his screen. Mallory's paper. Flagged. His unspoken legacy cracked. The silence in Jaylen's room was deafening. Not triumphant. Not victorious. Just heavy. Because it wasn't about beating Mallory. It was about proving the system could be wrong, and that someone like Jaylen could be the one to fix it. A week later, an email landed in Jaylen's university inbox. Subject: invitation to present at faculty research colloquium. Challenging structures in mathematical thought. He read it twice. Then again. He hadn't applied. He hadn't submitted anything under his real name. But someone knew. The email continued. We would be honored to have you present a short lecture at our upcoming faculty symposium. A submission titled, A Reconsideration of Recursive Convergence, was brought to our attention, and we believe your insights would benefit the department greatly. Attendance will include full faculty, visiting scholars, and several alumni donors. Dr. Mallory is scheduled to moderate the session. Jaylen leaned back, his heart pounding. They knew, and they were calling him in, not to punish, not yet, but to see, to test, maybe even to discredit him. Miles read the email over Jaylen's shoulder and whistled low. Damn, that's not an invitation. That's a duel. Jaylen didn't blink. He looked at the date, the room number, the time, then nodded. Let's give them a show they'll never forget. Mallory receives the event schedule in his inbox. His eyes land on the name J. Rhodes, under the keynote slot. He stares at it for a long time. The first signs of retaliation didn't come with sirens or announcements. They came quietly like smoke before the fire. It began with an obscure post on an anonymous faculty forum. Someone shared a heavily redacted document, labeled Academic Probation, J.M. Rhodes. No author, no citation. But the message was clear. The math genius isn't clean. Then came the coordinated attacks. Conservative blogs picked it up within hours. Scholarship faker, read one headline. Another went further. Affirmative action fraud, diversity admits genius math proof under review. None of it was verified, but that didn't matter. On the internet, rumor moved faster than truth. And reputation burned faster than anything. Jaylen sat in the Hawthorne Cafe, scrolling through the growing chaos on his phone, the screen flickering with notifications. His name was trending, not on academic sites but on Reddit threads, Twitter hashtags, and YouTube thumbnails featuring his blurred-out dorm photo. Across from him, Miles leaned forward. You're everywhere. Jaylen barely responded. I mean, they're everywhere. Miles corrected, angry. They found your scholarship records. Someone leaked your GPA from high school. They're twisting everything. Bro, there's a guy with 200K subs breaking down your fakeness like he's solving a mystery podcast episode. Jaylen stayed quiet. Because it wasn't the visibility that bothered him. It was the familiarity. He'd seen this before. Not with calculus, but with every black kid who made it just far enough to get noticed, then targeted. The next headline made it personal. From the Hood to Hawthorne. With a little help from D. It showed a photo of Jaylen in front of a chalkboard. Mid-presentation cropped out of context, the colors tweaked to look harsh and unflattering. The caption read, "Is this what academic excellence looks like now?" The article was picked up by syndicated outlets. Fox-style anchors discussed it with mock sympathy. He might be brilliant. Sure. But should we be concerned about the integrity of our institutions? Another commentator wasn't subtle. Let's be real. If a white student had faked a proof, he'd be gone. But here, he's being celebrated. Jaylen watched, numbly, as his humanity was sliced into content. A caricature crafted by algorithms and outrage. And no one from the university said a word. Not the dean. Not the board. Not even Dr. Park. Not even to correct the lie. The attack spread offline. Back home in South Central, Jaylen's mother, Denise, began getting strange phone calls. The first few she ignored. Spam, she thought. Then came the voicemails. You taught your son to lie? How's it feel knowing the only thing he earned was a free ride? At the hospital, coworkers whispered behind her back. One nurse, visibly uncomfortable, asked if she was holding up okay with all that stuff in the news. Denise forced a smile, but it cracked when she got home. She sat in her car that night, engine off, gripping the steering wheel. For 10 minutes she didn't move. Then she cried, not because her son had done anything wrong, but because the world around him couldn't stand that he was right. Jaylen tried to go to class the next day. He lasted 17 minutes. The stares were louder than the whispers. Even students who had once asked for help now avoided eye contact. One girl slid her desk a few inches away when he sat down beside her. A group of guys laughed too loudly in the corner. He couldn't hear what they were saying, but he didn't need to. It was the same laugh he'd heard at Crenshaw High when a teacher mispronounced his name. The laugh that said, "You don't belong here." Later that afternoon, a summons arrived in his email. Immediate meeting, Dean Harlow's office, regarding student well-being. Jaylen walked into the polished lobby of the admin building, jaw set. When he entered her office, Harlow gestured toward the chair without even looking up from her notes. "We've been reviewing the recent situation," she began, "and due to the volume of media attention, the administration is concerned about your emotional health and the safety of other students." Jaylen blinked. "Other students?" Harlow nodded. "Given the volume of threats being sent to the campus accounts and the online conversations surrounding your file, we're recommending temporarily that you take a voluntary withdrawal." Jaylen stared at her. "You're asking me to leave," he said quietly. "Not permanently," she offered. "Just until things cool down." He shook his head slowly. "I've done nothing wrong." "We know," she said softly now. "But the optics." Jaylen stood. "Let me save you the phrasing," he said. "I became a problem you didn't expect. And now you're doing what every system does with a problem it can't control. You're moving it out of sight." She didn't respond. Didn't need to. The silence was a confession. That night, Jaylen sat alone in his room. Even Miles didn't know what to say anymore. The laptop was closed. The blinds drawn. The lights off. He sat on the floor, knees pulled to his chest, staring at the empty ceiling. The camera was gone, but he still felt watched, judged, measured against a standard built to break him. His phone buzzed. He almost didn't check it, but something instinct or desperation made him look. A new message request. From an account with no name, no avatar. "Eid Ghost Archive Night." The message said, "I believe you. Meet me. I have proof." No signature, no location, just those words. Jaylen read it twice. Then again. He stared at the screen, mind racing. It could be bait, a trap, or it could be the piece he didn't know he needed. The only piece left. Jaylen's thumb hovers over reply, as the screen glitches once, then locks, and a second message appears. "I know what they're hiding. Don't trust anyone on the faculty." Jaylen sat in the dark, the glow of his phone screen burning into his eyes. The anonymous message blinked at him like a coded lifeline. "I know what they're hiding. Don't trust anyone on the faculty." He didn't move. Didn't type. He was beyond shocked. He was suspended in something colder than fear. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This wasn't just pressure. It was deeper, designed, intentional. He finally typed, "Who are you?" The reply came instantly. "You already know." Jaylen froze. Then his eyes widened. A new message followed. "Meet me in the greenhouse. 10 p.m. Come alone." He knew exactly who it was. At exactly 9:58 p.m., Jaylen slipped into the back door of Hawthorne's botanical greenhouse. The building, tucked behind the chemistry hall, was barely used outside of spring. The campus was mostly empty at night, and the greenhouse lights created strange shadows across the ivy-lined glass. He stepped inside, heart pounding. The humidity hit him first, then the scent of soil, then movement. A figure stepped from behind a curtain of hanging vines. "Jaylen," she said softly. It was Dr. Lena Park, short, sharp-featured, early 30s. Her eyes were always serious, too serious for someone who'd only been teaching 5 years. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept in days. "You sent the messages?" he asked, voice low. She nodded once. "I couldn't use my name. They monitor our accounts. My office printer's been tapped. I'm pretty sure my email gets flagged every time I mention your name." Jaylen didn't respond. He waited. She exhaled, then pulled a worn manila folder from her bag and handed it to him. He opened it. Inside, emails, memos, transcripts from deans, professors, admissions officers, subject lines like Ray Urban Risk Index, concern Ray Diversity Admit GPA Trends. We should monitor cohort anomalies more aggressively next term. Jaylen flipped through the pages, each one heavier than the last.
What is this? He asked. The real Hawthorne, Lena said. The part no one's allowed to talk about.
She stepped closer. I started gathering it after I got passed over for tenure. Mallory blocked me. Said I lacked pedagogical authority. But I've watched him push out 4 other faculty women. People of color. Anyone who questioned how he ran things. Jaylen clenched the folder.
You knew this was happening to me, he asked.
I suspected, she said. But I didn't have proof. Until you proved yourself. She reached into her coat and pulled out a USB drive. This is the backup. Emails between Mallory and the dean. About you. About students like you. They call it a containment strategy. Keep you visible enough to check a box, but not too visible to become a threat. Jaylen swallowed hard. His whole body felt like it had been dropped into ice water. Why are you showing me this now? He asked. Because you're not the first, Lena said, voice tight. But you might be the first who can't be silenced. Jaylen looked at her, saw the wear in her shoulders. The risk she was taking. You want me to go public, he said. She didn't answer, because he already knew. Back in his dorm, Jaylen sat cross-legged on the floor, the folder open in front of him, pages spread out like puzzle pieces. Surveillance memos, diversity performance charts, screenshots of private Slack messages among faculty joking about DEI quotas. He called Miles. I need your help, he said. 10 minutes later, Miles was there. Hoodie pulled up, face tense. Jaylen showed him everything. Miles swore under his breath. This isn't just racism. This is a system. Engineered. Exactly, Jaylen said. Together they scanned and digitized the documents. Miles encrypted the files, uploaded them to a cloud drive. Jaylen recorded a short statement. Calm. Direct. He didn't name Mallory. Not yet. He didn't even mention the racism explicitly. He let the documents do that for him. He ended the video with a single line. Sometimes math doesn't lie. But the people behind it do. They uploaded the package to a secure press drop box that Lena recommended. Then waited. 48 hours later, Jaylen got a call from a restricted number. Is this Mr. Rhodes? The voice said. Female. Calm. Yes, he said cautiously. This is Rachel Medina, investigative reporter with The Atlantic. I received your file. I've reviewed the evidence. I believe you, and I want to break this story. Jaylen stood in the middle of his room, unsure what to say. You'll be protected, she continued. We'll use secure sources, redact identities, but I need to be honest. She paused. This story will cost you. Jaylen gripped the phone. How much? Everything, she said. Your scholarship, your place at Hawthorne, maybe even your future in academia. They'll circle the wagons. You're naming people with tenure. You're attacking a machine that protects itself. Jaylen closed his eyes. I'm not doing it for revenge, he said. I'm doing it for justice, for every student still trapped inside it. A long pause. Then Rachel said, then let's tell the truth. As Jaylen hangs up, his phone buzzes again. This time it's a warning from an anonymous number. They know you leaked it. Mallory just called a closed-door meeting. The faculty conference took place inside the ivory-paneled walls of Hawthorne's historic Adler Auditorium. The room, with its vaulted ceiling and oil paintings of long-dead department founders, was rarely used for anything other than donor galas or prestige lectures. But today it buzzed with quiet anticipation. The annual colloquium had drawn faculty from across the university, visiting scholars, and a select handful of undergraduates handpicked for intellectual enrichment. Jaylen sat near the back, dressed in a plain black blazer over a turtleneck. Clean, professional, but not flashy. He wore no name tag. Miles stood nearby, backpack slung over one shoulder, managing the AV table with quiet focus. Jaylen had asked him to stay close, both for support and to ensure nothing accidentally went wrong during his talk. On the main stage, behind the long oak podium, Dr. Victor Mallory stood with practiced grace, holding a clipboard and scanning the schedule. His name was printed across the top of the agenda, moderator, Dr. Victor E. Mallory. His expression was unreadable. His eyes moved slowly down the page, then froze on the fifth speaker. J.R. Assent, independent researcher. Mallory blinked once. He knew. He didn't show it, but he knew. The colloquium unfolded in stages. The first speaker, a senior lecturer from MIT, presented a study on quantum probabilistic functions. Polite applause. The next, a PhD candidate from Berlin, walked through a visualization model for weather simulations. Moderate interest. Then came the fourth speaker, an industry executive talking about data compression. And then Mallory stepped forward. Our next presentation, he said smoothly, comes from a rather unconventional contributor. The room hushed. A paper titled A Reconsideration of Recursive Convergence in High-Dimensional Spaces was recently submitted to several open-source journals under a pseudonym. The mathematics community responded swiftly. Some have described the work as disruptive. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Mallory continued, eyes gleaming. The author, under the name J.R. Assent, has agreed to present their findings today. He stepped aside. All eyes turned as Jaylen walked toward the podium. No name tag, no department affiliation. Just a black freshman, stepping into the lion's den. Jaylen took a breath. His hands were steady. He didn't look at Mallory. He didn't need to. He began with a clean slate slide, a white screen with a single line of text. What happens when the system can't explain the exception? Then slowly, methodically, he built his case. He walked through the foundation of Mallory's 1999 preprint, not by attacking it, but by appreciating it. He complimented its ambition, its structure. He explained how its recursive modeling was groundbreaking for its time. And then he moved into the errors. With poise, not arrogance, he detailed the convergence flaw, how the model held under fixed constraints, but broke apart when scaled into certain limit cases. Then he introduced his own revision, the correction. And as he did, the room shifted. A few professors leaned forward, laptops closed. Pens paused. Jaylen clicked to a slide showing the side-by-side performance of Mallory's model and his corrected version in a real-world scenario, resource optimization and high-dimensional forecasting models. The audience watched as the original model destabilized in red, while Jaylen's held stable in green. Silent nods. Furrowed brows. One professor mouthed, "Damn." He moved into applications, climate modeling, AI training, financial projections, places where precision and convergence was critical. He wrapped up in under 18 minutes. No rambling.
No filler.
Just truth. The final slide read, "Every mistake once corrected can become something greater than it was ever meant to be." He looked up, silent. Then, applause. Not polite.
Not reflexive.
Stunned. Reluctant. Then rising. It started with 2 hands. Then 10. Then the room. Even the tenured professors stood. Even the ones who didn't want to. Mallory remained seated. He didn't clap. His eyes were locked on Jaylen. Not with anger. With something colder, recognition. The prodigy had taken the master's flaw and turned it into fire. Mallory stood slowly, adjusting his cuffs. He walked to the stage with the microphone. "Impressive," he said, voice smooth. "Truly impressive. I must admit I've seen versions of this model for decades, but never quite like this." He smiled tightly. "It's a testament to how far the field has come, and how open access has democratized mathematics." Jaylen knew exactly what that meant. Mallory couldn't attack the work, so he'd attack the context, dismiss the discovery as a fluke of the internet, as amateur innovation rather than scholarly correction. Jaylen didn't respond. He simply turned, stepped down from the podium, and walked toward the rear exit. Applause followed him, but he didn't look back. He wasn't there to be validated. He was there to be undeniable. Outside in the cold marble hallway, Jaylen leaned against the wall, exhaling slowly. He felt empty, not in defeat, but in release. He had said what needed to be said. And now the weight of it, the years of silence, suspicion and struggle, were slowly peeling off him. "Excuse me," a voice said. Jaylen looked up. A woman mid-30s, sharp blazer, notebook in hand. "I'm Elise Carter. I write for Mathline and freelance for The Atlantic." "I was in there." Jaylen said nothing. "Waiting." She smiled. "You just embarrassed a tenured Ivy League legend. Quietly. Publicly. Mathematically. That doesn't happen every day." Jaylen exhaled, almost amused. "I didn't mean to." "Even better," she said. "Because you didn't humiliate him. You humbled the system. And people are going to want to know who you are." Jaylen shook his head slowly. I'm not interested in attention.
You don't need to be.
She replied. It's already coming. She handed him a card. Let me know when you're ready to talk about what you've really uncovered. Jaylen stared down at the card. Then, up at the auditorium doors. Inside, Mallory was shaking hands, smiling stiffly, pretending none of this had touched him. But Jaylen knew. The foundation had shifted, and Mallory could feel it cracking beneath him. As Jaylen pockets the card, he receives a text from Miles. Bro, you need to see this. Someone just leaked Mallory's emails. The expose dropped at 8:01 a.m. on a Tuesday. It began as a quiet tremor, just another headline in the digital storm. But within minutes it became a reckoning. Inside the Ivy League's quiet war against black brilliance. By Rachel Medina, The Atlantic. Jaylen read the article alone in his dorm, heart hammering in his chest. The words on the screen glowed in silence, but he felt their weight roar through his bones. The article was precise, ruthless in its facts. It laid out the years of discrimination, Mallory's emails, the surveillance, the pattern of academic probation targeting diversity admits. It quoted unnamed faculty calling Jaylen a containment priority. It featured a still image of his revised mathematical proof beside the phrase, a correction too elegant to ignore. By 10 a.m., it had been shared over 100. By noon, the story hit MSNBC. By evening, Jaylen's face was on CNN. Mallory responded that same night. He didn't issue a press release. He held a press conference. Clean suit. Scripted statement. I categorically deny any involvement in surveillance or discriminatory actions against any student, he said, flanked by 2 senior administrators. This attack is part of a coordinated effort to discredit a legacy of academic excellence. A reporter raised a hand. Did you refer to Jaylen Rhodes in internal messages as a containment priority? Mallory didn't blink. Out of context, all phrases can be weaponized, he replied. I will not engage in political theater. Jaylen watched the broadcast from Miles's laptop. Miles scoffed. He just admitted guilt without saying the word guilt. Jaylen didn't respond. His stomach churned with something worse than anger. Familiarity. Within 48 hours, Jaylen's name split the country down the middle. One side called him a hero. The voice of a new generation. Proof that systemic racism lived in the bones of even the most elite institutions. They created hashtags. Genius silenced. Jaylen was right. Let him speak.
Think pieces filled the internet.
Educators demanded accountability. A few called for Mallory's resignation. But the other side was louder. More coordinated. Affirmative action hoax trended on Twitter. YouTube reactionaries picked apart the article line by line. Podcasts accused Jaylen of manipulating race for clout. One headline screamed, "The new Jussie Smollett. Only smarter." Even academic circles weren't united. Some professors praised his math, but questioned his motives. Others refused to read the proof at all, calling it tainted by activism. Jaylen had become a Rorschach test. Everyone saw what they needed to. No one saw him. 3 days later, the university broke its silence. Dean Harlow appeared on a live stream, grim-faced. We are announcing an independent inquiry into the allegations raised in the Atlantic expose. We take these claims seriously. Jaylen leaned forward, waiting for her next words. During this investigation, Mr. Rhodes will be placed on indefinite academic suspension, with housing and campus access revoked, effective immediately. Jaylen stared at the screen. Miles stood behind him, frozen. They're kicking you out, he whispered. Jaylen's mind reeled. For telling the truth. No, Miles said quietly. For surviving it. At night, Jaylen packed in silence. The box was small. A few books, notebooks, old test papers. The spiral-bound journal he'd carried since middle school. He moved slowly, mechanically. By midnight, he was back at Miles's off-campus apartment, sleeping on the floor beside a stack of stolen library books and charging tables. He lay awake for hours. Not from fear, from emptiness. The next morning, Jaylen didn't leave the apartment. Not that day.
Not the next.
He didn't check social media. Didn't return calls. Didn't reply to the supportive DMs piling up in his inbox. He just sat, watching sunlight move across the floor like a slow ghost. Miles tried. He brought food, played music, made dumb jokes. But Jaylen barely responded. Because it wasn't just the university that had turned on him. It was the system he thought he'd beaten. It was the dream his mother had worked 2 jobs to make real. It was every page of that math book he taught himself to read, suddenly feeling like a lie. On the 4th day, Miles walked in holding his phone, face pale. You need to sit down. Jaylen already was. Miles handed him the screen. A headline. Professor Mallory files $2 million defamation suit against former student. Jaylen blinked. What? He's suing you, Miles said, claiming the article damaged his career, his academic reputation, and caused emotional distress. Jaylen read the details. The lawsuit claimed Jaylen conspired with media outlets to create a false narrative that irreparably harmed Mallory's legacy. Jaylen looked up, eyes wide with disbelief. He attacked me. He engineered this. I know, Miles said. But now he's trying to flip the script, make you the aggressor. Jaylen felt his throat tighten. He wanted to scream, but nothing came out. Later that night, Jaylen stood on the balcony of Miles's apartment, staring out at the street below. It was quiet, too quiet. Inside, the world was exploding. Outside, it kept turning. He thought about his mom, how hard she worked, how proud she was, how she cried in her car just days ago. He thought about the boy he used to be, 10 years old, sitting in the corner of the library, with a calculus book too heavy for his backpack. He thought about what they were trying to take. Not just his name, not just his scholarship, but his truth. He turned to Miles. I'm not running. Miles nodded. Good. Because this time, we're not playing defense. Jaylen receives a message from a private legal aid group. We've been following your story. We want to help you fight back. The email arrived on a gray Thursday morning. Its subject line was so bland it almost felt like spam. Notice of status reinstatement. Hawthorne University. Jaylen sat at Miles's kitchen table, still in sweatpants, a half-drunk cup of coffee cooling beside him. He clicked it cautiously, bracing for another ambush dressed in bureaucratic politeness. But this time, the message was clear. Effective immediately, Jaylen Rhodes has been reinstated as a full-time student in good academic standing. His scholarship has been fully restored. A formal apology will be issued by the Office of the Provost in recognition of the hardship endured due to procedural missteps and institutional failures. He read it again. Slowly. Then again. Across the table, Miles watched his face closely. What is it? Jaylen looked up, almost unsure of his own words. They reinstated me. Miles blinked. Wait. Like, all of it? Scholarship too? Jaylen nodded, but his expression didn't shift. No joy. No relief, just a cold kind of clarity. Yeah, he said. All of it. But not because they believe in me, because they're afraid of what happens if they don't. And deep down, he was right. 2 days later, the university held a small press conference. No students, no banners, just a podium, a seal and the provost, reading from a printed sheet with too much space between the lines. We acknowledge the institutional oversights that contributed to the hardship faced by Mr. Rhodes. His academic record and contributions speak for themselves. Hawthorne remains committed to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Not a single mention of racism. No apology for the surveillance. No condemnation of Mallory. It was antiseptic. A bandage on a bullet wound. Jaylen didn't attend. He watched from Miles's couch, arms folded, expression unreadable. When the live stream ended, Miles shook his head. That's it? That's their apology? Jaylen's voice was low. That's their survival instinct. The same day, news broke that Mallory had resigned for personal reasons. There was no admission of guilt, no stripped credentials, no revoked honors, just a one-paragraph announcement from the board, thanking him for his years of distinguished academic service. Jaylen sat with that sentence for a long time. Distinguished. He wondered how many black students Mallory had buried under that word. How many doors had been sealed shut while the university clapped politely at his lectures. But he wasn't surprised. He had never expected justice to come gift-wrapped. Not here. Not from them. A week later, Jaylen got an email from the Student Recognition Committee. They were offering him a special award. For courage, perseverance, and academic integrity. An honorary citation to be handed out at a spring award ceremony. Jaylen didn't hesitate. He hit delete, then typed a short email in reply. Respectfully, I decline. Honor doesn't need to be performative. Use the money to fund a real scholarship. For students who don't have time to prove they belong. He pressed send, and felt lighter. Not because he'd said no, but because he'd made space for a better yes. That night, Jaylen met with Dr. Lena Park and Miles at a quiet diner just off campus. They sat in a booth by the window, untouched menus in front of them. So, Lena said, sipping tea, what now? You could go anywhere. You've got offers, lectures, think tanks lining up. Jaylen leaned back. I don't want to be a symbol. Miles raised an eyebrow. You already are. Jaylen shook his head. Symbols are hollow. I want to be useful. He pulled a notebook from his backpack and laid it on the table. Inside were charts, flow maps, bullet points. At the top of the page, scrawled in black ink, STEM X, Open Calculus for the Forgotten Genius. Jaylen tapped the cover. No paywall. No gatekeeping. No white papers. Just access. We teach kids what I taught myself. From scratch. Lena leaned in. You're serious. Jaylen nodded. We start with calculus. But we build a world. Miles grinned. A world where Crenshaw and Compton have the same math tools as Cambridge. Jaylen smiled for the first time in days. Exactly. They launched STEMX 6 weeks later. It was raw, basic, clean. A mobile-optimized site with 3 simple tabs. Learn, solve, rise. Jaylen recorded the first course himself. No fancy lighting. No scripts. Just a chalkboard and a voice saying, if no one taught you, let me. By week 2, over 9,000 students had enrolled. By week 4, from inner-city schools, from rural districts, from refugee camps, with spotty Wi-Fi and underfunded teachers. Some sent messages. One read, my school never had a calculus class. Thank you for making me believe I could be good at this. Another, I'm 13, and from Kenya. I want to be like you. Jaylen read every one. He didn't respond to all of them, but he carried them. Like armor. Graduation came quietly. Jaylen wore his cap and gown, not for the university, but for his mother. Denise sat in the front row, eyes wet, heart full. When his name was called, he walked with calm, deliberate steps across the stage. No fanfare.
No cameras.
Just the weight of every moment that nearly broke him, and the strength it took to keep walking. He shook hands with the new dean, accepted his diploma, and stepped down without looking back. Behind the curtain, Miles clapped him on the back. Lena hugged him. You did it, she whispered. Jaylen exhaled slowly. No, he said. We did it. As he gathered his things in the green room, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. He hesitated, then answered. Hello? A calm, confident voice on the other end. Mr. Rhodes, this is Dr. Vanessa Hume. I'm calling from MIT. Jaylen's heart skipped. I've been following your story, your TEDx talk, STEMX, your paper. He didn't speak, just listened. We think you're exactly what the future of mathematics looks like. But more importantly, what the future of systems reform looks like. She paused. We want you for something bigger. Jaylen swallowed. What kind of something? Dr. Hume replied. We're building a task force, not just for research, but for ethics, policy, and structural change. You'd be shaping the foundation. From the inside. Are you ready to rewrite more than equations? Jaylen looked at his diploma. Then at the STEMX dashboard glowing from his laptop. Then back to the phone. Jaylen says, I'm listening. Dr. Hume responds. Good. Because this is how you build a world from the blueprint they tried to erase. The envelope was thick, expensive, and embossed in gold. Jaylen almost didn't open it. He'd received dozens like it since the TEDx talk, speaking invitations, think tank proposals, consulting gigs. But this one was different. Hawthorne University Guest Lecture Series welcomes Jaylen Rhodes, founder of STEMX. He stared at it for a long time. The irony dripped from the page like ink still wet. The same institution that once accused him of academic fraud now wanted him back to teach. He didn't say yes to forgive. He said yes to reclaim. Hawthorne looked exactly the same. That was the first thing he noticed when he stepped out of the Uber. The stone buildings, the high-arched windows, the silence that wrapped itself around the courtyard like ivy. But something was different too. It wasn't the campus. It was him. He walked past the dorm where he once found that note. Stay in your lane. Past the library, where he hid between stacks, learning derivatives alone. Past the cafeteria that once buzzed with whispers about the mute scholarship genius. Now they whispered something else. They whispered his name. Room Mallory's old room. Jaylen stood outside the door for a moment, letting the weight of it settle. He reached for the handle, pushed it open. The room smelled the same. Dry erase, cold air, old wood floors. Students filtered in, curious eyes darting his way. A few whispered to each other. A girl in the front row straightened her spine when he caught her glance. Jaylen didn't speak. Not yet. He turned to the board and picked up a marker. and wrote the same equation. The exact one Mallory once used to mock his silence. It sprawled across the board like a challenge, nested integrals, vector spaces, boundary conditions. He capped the marker, turned to face the class. Who here thinks this is impossible? No one moved. A few exchanged uncertain looks. Jaylen smiled faintly. I used to think so too, but not because it was unsolvable, because I was told I wasn't supposed to solve it. A few students shifted in their seats. Curious now. Jaylen turned back to the board. This is what Dr. Mallory once gave me. Without warning, without context, with a smirk. He paused. But today we're not just solving it, we're understanding it. And with that, he began, step by step. He didn't rush. He explained every decision, every transformation, every layer of meaning buried in the math. The students leaned in. Some took notes. Others just watched. He talked not just about the numbers but the philosophy, how mathematics mirrored systems, how sometimes the structure of a problem made you believe it wasn't worth trying. But brilliance, he said, isn't loud. It's patient. The board filled with clarity. Each line sharp. Every step logical. At the end he drew a box around the solution. Finished. Clean. Elegant. Then he turned. They thought silence meant ignorance, Jaylen said. But it meant I was calculating. The room stayed quiet for a beat. Then applause, slow, respectful, then rising like a wave. Jaylen stood still. Not proud. Just present. He had taken the space they tried to deny him, and made it his own. After the lecture, some students came up to speak with him. A few asked about the math. A few asked about STEMX. Most just thanked him. But Jaylen's eyes were drawn to the back of the room. A young black student sat there alone, hoodie pulled low, notebook open on his lap. He hadn't moved since the lecture started. Hadn't spoken, but he watched every second. Jaylen packed up slowly. As he walked past the student, he offered a nod. The boy looked up and smiled. Not wide, not eager, just a quiet, knowing smile. A mirror of the one Jaylen once held inside. Jaylen didn't say anything. He didn't have to. Some messages didn't need words. He walked out and left the board behind. Outside, the campus wind swept through the trees, stirring the red and gold leaves into a slow dance. Jaylen zipped his coat and looked up at the tall clock tower that once loomed like a judgment. Now it just looked small. He walked past the administration building, past the statue of Hawthorne's founder, past the hall where he'd once been put on trial for being too brilliant in the wrong skin. He remembered his mother's tears, Miles' support, Lena's courage. Every step was a victory now. But he didn't carry it like a trophy. He carried it like a blueprint for the next boy, the next girl, the next genius told to be quiet. He pulled out his phone and opened the STEMX dashboard. Over 180,000 students, 12 countries, thousands of submitted problem sets, hundreds of thank you videos, testimonials, breakthroughs. Not bad for a kid who taught himself calculus in a public library. A notification buzzed. MIT Research Task Force orientation. Tomorrow at 9. He smiled. Not because he'd made it, but because now, he could make space for others. As he walked toward the exit, the reflection returned quiet but sharp, like the edge of a theorem revealing itself. How many geniuses do we silence before they speak? And how many never get the chance? Jaylen didn't have the answer. But now he had a voice and a platform, and he intended to use them loudly, brilliantly, and without apology. No one should have to earn their humanity just to be seen. Jaylen's story isn't rare. It's just finally being heard. If you've ever felt overlooked, erased, or underestimated, type yes if you believe silence should never be mistaken for weakness. Subscribe if this broke your heart and opened your eyes. The day after Mallory's lawsuit hit the news cycle, Jaylen expected the worst. Death threats were already flooding his inbox. Conservative outlets had now branded him not just a fraud, but a leftist pawn weaponizing race. He turned his phone off. For 24 hours he stayed silent. Then, a single tweet changed everything. I had Dr. Mallory in '09. What happened to Jaylen? I believe every word. This isn't new. He tried to bury me too. Post is by Aidan Locke, founder, CEO, billionaire, tech genius. A ghost from Hawthorne's past, and now Jaylen's most powerful ally. Miles read it first. He burst into the room, phone in hand, disbelief in his eyes. Bro, Locke just tweeted about you. Jaylen looked up from his notes. What? Miles tossed the phone to him. The tweet sat at the top of the screen. already with 90K likes and over 25,000 retweets. Jaylen's heart thudded. Aiden Locke wasn't just anyone. He was the dropout turned visionary who built Neuramind, the AI company redefining tech ethics and performance. He rarely spoke publicly. He never spoke about Hawthorne. But now he had broken that silence. For Jaylen. Within hours, Locke's tweet sparked an avalanche. Other former students began sharing their stories. One wrote, "Mallory told me during office hours, you people are good at memorizing, but not thinking. I left the STEM track that day." Another shared, "He gave me a C after I corrected him in class. TA said it was retaliation. I switched majors." These weren't anonymous rants. They were from engineers, educators, scientists, alumni with credentials, credibility, and long-held silence finally unraveling. Locke followed up his tweet with a medium-length blog post titled "The Gatekeeper Fallacy." He didn't mention Mallory by name, but he didn't have to. Academic excellence does not require cruelty, and genius does not demand racism. Some of us were not mentored, we were survived. He described how he built Neuramind on the principles of every door that was slammed in his face. How brilliance should not be filtered through elitist legacy networks but elevated by curiosity, grit, and support. The article trended across LinkedIn, Medium, and the tech world. By the end of the day, 2 major tech donors had paused contributions to Hawthorne's engineering fund. A third wrote in an open letter, "If Hawthorne continues to protect those who silence their most brilliant minds, our partnership must be re-evaluated." Meanwhile, Jaylen's inbox began to shift. Amid the hate and threats, new messages emerged. Former students, one after another. Some anonymous. Some bold, all validating what he had lived through. One message read, "Jaylen, I was you, but I didn't have the courage. Thank you." Another, "Mallory told me to tone down my ideas to not make the white students uncomfortable. I dropped out. You were making me believe again." Jaylen sat in the quiet of Miles's living room, scrolling through them slowly. His eyes burned, not from the screen, but from everything these people had held in for years. That week, a formal invitation landed in Jaylen's inbox. The subject line stunned him. TEDx Boston invitation. Talk title, "Brilliance in the Shadow of Bias." They wanted him to speak, not just about the scandal, but about the broader architecture of exclusion in elite academia. Jaylen stared at the screen, frozen. Miles looked over his shoulder. "You gotta do it." Jaylen shook his head. "I'm not a speaker." "You're a truth teller," Miles said. "That's more rare." Jaylen hesitated. "They'll twist it, make it about me, about revenge." Miles stood firm. "Then tell it your way. Not as a victim, not as a hero, as a survivor." Jaylen accepted the invite. TEDx Boston, a crimson-lit stage, an audience of scholars, creators, and activists. Cameras positioned from all angles. Jaylen walked to the center of the spotlight, wearing the same black blazer he wore when he'd presented his revised calculus proof. His silent rebellion stitched into the fabric. He began not with a quote, but with a memory. "I used to read calculus books in the corner of a public library, because I couldn't afford tutoring. I thought if I just worked hard enough I'd be safe. But the truth is, no amount of brilliance protects you from a system built to erase you." He spoke of academic trauma, of silent racism dressed as rigor, of excellence punished when it didn't wear the right face. He never named Mallory. He didn't have to. He spoke to every student who had ever been told they were lucky to be in the room, instead of being the reason the room mattered. He ended with a single line, "A system that fears correction will never allow genius to thrive. And I'm done asking for permission to exist." The applause was immediate and thunderous. Back on campus, the pressure cooker cracked. A whistleblower, likely from inside the administration, leaked a folder to the press. Inside, dozens of emails between Mallory and other faculty, dating back over a decade. Subject lines like, "Handling diversity optics. Do we really need more outreach this year? Let's filter unicorns more aggressively." But what caught fire were the jokes. Ivy League or BET awards. "We keep bending the curve. He talks a big game. Let's see if he can graph his way out of Crenshaw." And worst of all, Mallory had manipulated grades. There it was, in black and white. Drop her B to a C. No paper trail. She'll transfer out on her own. The emails were published by multiple outlets within hours. Every news cycle carried the story. This wasn't academic rivalry anymore. This was targeted institutional racism. The university had no choice. A press conference was called. Dean Harlow stood behind the podium, pale and composed. We are convening an emergency board meeting to investigate the conduct of Professor Victor Mallory. He has been placed on administrative leave, effective immediately. Jaylen watched from Miles's couch. He didn't cheer. He didn't gloat. He just whispered to himself, "They're finally looking at him the way they looked at me." Behind closed doors, the board scrambled. Mallory hadn't just hurt students. He'd endangered funding. He'd compromised the integrity of the university's most sacred trust, that it was above the messiness of race and power. Now that lie was burned into the headlines. One board member, an aging trustee from New York, leaned in during the private session. "If Mallory falls," he whispered, "half this faculty goes with him." An anonymous faculty email circulates. Warning: if Mallory goes down, we release everything. Every cover-up. Every name. Choose wisely.